de imagen, así como su voz, se encuentran protegidas. Este evento cuenta con traducción simultánea. Para activarla, dé clic en el siguiente icono y elija el idioma de su preferencia, tal y como aparece en su pantalla. Asimismo, podrán realizar preguntas en todo momento a través del botón que encontrarán en la barra inferior de sus pantallas, como aparece en este video. Todas sus preguntas serán comunicadas a la persona moderadora, quien las planteará a las personas panelistas para darles respuesta. En caso de que sigan la transmisión vía streaming a través de YouTube o Facebook, tengan la seguridad que estaremos monitoreando sus preguntas para agregarlas a las recibidas aquí en Zoom. Dichas preguntas se responderán en medida que el tiempo nos lo permita. De antemano, gracias por su participación. Antes de terminar esta sesión, pediremos su apoyo a fin de evaluar la calidad de nuestros contenidos. Les rogamos su amable respuesta. Solo así podremos continuar mejorando. Ahora sí, comenzamos.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buenas tardes a todos, a todas. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos en esta conferencia magistral, Justicia para Niñas, Niños y Adolescentes y el Objetivo de Desarrollo Sostenible 16. Esta conferencia, como ya se mencionó en el video, se llevará a cabo mediante traducción simultánea, por lo que podrán activar el audio en el idioma que prefieran, ya sea inglés o español, dando clic sobre el icono de interpretaciones representado por un círculo con líneas dentro, el cual se encuentra en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla. Asimismo, les informo que previamente se recolectaron sus preguntas para la representante especial, las cuales serán respondidas por la doctora Nayat Mala Majid, las cuales les agradecemos enormemente. Sin más preámbulo, le cedo el uso de la voz a la maestra Regina Castro Traulsen, directora general de Derechos Humanos de la Suprema Corte de Justicia de la Nación. Adelante, maestra.
Muy buenas tardes a todas las personas que nos acompañan el día de hoy. Desde la Dirección General de Derechos Humanos de la Suprema Corte de Justicia de la Nación, les doy la más cordial bienvenida y les agradezco su presencia en esta plataforma de seminarios web. Hoy tenemos la conferencia magistral denominada Justicia para Niñas, Niños y Adolescentes y el Objetivo de Desarrollo Sostenible 16. La Agenda 2030 fue adoptada por la Asamblea General de la Organización de Naciones Unidas en septiembre de 2015 y fue suscrita por los 193 Estados miembros de esa organización. El objetivo 16 de dicha agenda consiste en promover sociedades justas, pacíficas e inclusivas. Hoy analizaremos este tema desde la perspectiva de la infancia, lo cual nos lleva a reflexionar sobre el acceso a la justicia de niños, niñas y adolescentes. Para ello, tenemos el honor de contar con la presencia de la doctora Nayat Maya, quien es representante especial del Secretario General de Naciones Unidas sobre la violencia contra los niños. A continuación, resumiré la extensa experiencia de nuestra ponente. Durante las últimas 3 décadas, la doctora Nayat Maya ha dedicado su vida a la promoción y protección de los derechos del niño. Fue jefa del Departamento de Pediatría y directora del Hospital Materno Infantil Jai Hassani en Casablanca, Marruecos. Asimismo, es parte del Consejo Nacional de Derechos Humanos de Marruecos y fundadora de la organización no gubernamental Baiti, el primer programa que aborda la situación de los niños que viven y trabajan en las calles de Marruecos. De 2008 a 2014 se desempeñó como relator especial de las Naciones Unidas sobre la venta de niños, la prostitución infantil y la pornografía infantil. La doctora Nayat Maya es consultora experta para proyectos, estrategias y políticas nacionales e internacionales relacionados con la promoción y protección de los derechos del niño. Forma parte de varias redes y organizaciones no gubernamentales regionales e internacionales que trabajan por los derechos del niño y participa en la capacitación de trabajadores sociales, fuerzas del orden, maestros, juezas y personal médico. Asimismo, la doctora Nayat Ha participado en el desarrollo de políticas nacionales de protección de la niñez y ha trabajado con varios gobiernos, así como con organizaciones no gubernamentales e intergubernamentales. Además, es profesora en universidades marroquíes y en internacionales sobre protección, promoción, programación y seguimiento de los derechos humanos. Por último, no quiero dejar de mencionar que la doctora Nayat participa también con la Dirección General de Derechos Humanos como autora en una obra que se publicará el próximo año llamado Acceso a la Justicia para Niños, Niñas y Adolescentes en Contexto de Movilidad Internacional. La doctora Nayat abordará precisamente el capítulo sobre derecho a la salud, sobre los niños, niñas y adolescentes en este contexto, y será, por supuesto, parte muy importante de nuestra obra, así que la podrán leer en español el próximo año. Por favor, no dejen de estar atentos a la publicación de esta obra. Y bien, sin más preámbulo, le cedo la voz a la doctora Nayat Maya, agradeciéndole mucho su presencia en este evento. Muchas gracias, doctora.
You hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to address you this evening, and I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the Supreme Court of Mexico for the invitation to participate. As special representative of the UN Secretary General, my role is to act as a global, independent advocate for the elimination of all forms of violence against children. And my work is guided by the Convention on the Rights of the Child and other relevant international human rights standards. I am also mandated by the General Assembly of the United Nations to support the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. As you know, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted unanimously by the international community in 2015. It provides a universal vision for human development relevant to all countries and to all regions. There are several distinct targets in the 2030 Agenda that commit states to ending violence against children. But this issue is also cross-cutting. The drivers of violence and the most significant risk and protective factors for children are connected with many different parts of the 2030 Agenda. The Sustainable Development Goals related to poverty, health, education, gender, and social inclusion, for example, cannot be achieved if violence continues to blight children's life. Ladies and gentlemen, in my remarks today, I will focus on another cross-cutting theme, ensuring justice for children in the context of implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainable Development Goal 16 calls for the promotion of peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. To achieve this, states must provide access to justice for all, in addition to building effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Goal 16 underpins all other SDGs goals. Without increased equal access to justice, security, inclusiveness, and accountability, it will be impossible to create conditions for sustaining peace and development. This commitment cannot be fulfilled unless we can ensure that all children without discrimination have equal access to justice, and that justice in all its forms meets the rights and needs of children as enshrined in international human rights standards. That is why my mandate, in collaboration with a range of other partners, launched a call for action on justice for children. It is a call for action to fulfill our collective global commitment to ensure that all children have peaceful, just, and inclusive lives. Ladies and gentlemen, our starting point must be the preventive role that justice can play in ensuring that children's rights are protected and their development supported. And I am thinking of justice in its broadest sense, embracing not only criminal and civil law, but also social justice. The exclusion and marginalization of people, especially children and young people, denies their human rights and undermines their well-being, leading to more vulnerability in society. In some places, children are even denied a legal identity. Children who come from poor and socially excluded communities are the most affected. Violence at home, poverty, structural violence, and risky survival activities propel children into the juvenile justice system. The majority of young people's challenging behaviors can be resolved and addressed without the need for punitive intervention. In many cases, contact with the justice system and any consequent criminalization and penalization of children simply creates problems. It doesn't bring solution. Moreover, across the world, there are children who are in contact with the justice system for offenses that should not be regarded as crimes. This includes, for example, status offense and legal measures used to target children living in street situations, as well as refugee and migrant children. Ladies and gentlemen, deprivation of liberty is one of the most harmful violations of children's fundamental human rights. In many places, its use is not only of concern, but growing, with children being deprived of liberty in the context of migration, in the context of armed group and violent extremist terrorists. Many children are held in administrative, preventive, military, or prolonged pre-trial detention without the guarantees of due process and in violation of their rights. It occurs very often in harmful conditions and with children detained with adults. Depriving a child of their liberty impacts on their well-being and continues into adulthood. The negative consequences contribute to poor physical and mental health, lack of access to education, a high rate of recidivism, family breakdown, and unemployment. This results in higher costs for society and state in the long term. This is why we must drastically reduce the number of children deprived of liberty, ensuring that detention is only used as a matter of last resort in exceptional circumstances and for the shortest possible period. Children should never be detained on the basis of their immigration status or because they are living and working on streets. Alternative to detention and to institutionalization, for example, restorative justice, rehabilitation and reintegration approaches must also be given greater priority. Research shows that parents who have assisted their child through a restorative justice or rehabilitation process show less inclination to resort to violence as a way of disciplining their child. Children who participate in this program show fewer tendencies towards antisocial behavior in the community and at home. They also demonstrate significantly lower rates of recidivism compared to other groups. As many of you know, the global study on children deprived of liberty was published last year. My mandate is leading the UN response to the global study and is currently mapping what action is needed to advance the global study recommendation in close cooperation with states, other UN agencies, civil society, and academia. Ladies and gentlemen, access to children to justice for child victims of violence is another crucial aspect of this issue for my mandate. Violence has long-term implications, both for the individual child and society at large. As you know, half of the world children, around 1 billion children in total, are victims of violence each year. However, violence against children is still vastly underreported and under-prosecuted and often met with a fragmented response or inaction. We must ensure children have equal protection from violence under the law and that this is guaranteed in practice. This includes a comprehensive ban of all forms of violence against children, as well as adherence to human rights principles regarding relevant criminal and civil proceedings. We must also ensure that justice systems interacting with child victims and witnesses of violence are truly child-sensitive. This requires commitment to a rights-based approach, a change in mindsets, and investment in the capacity of legal professionals to carry out their work in line with child rights principles. These principles include ensuring the competency of professionals in interviewing and communicating with children using methods appropriate to their age, stage of development, gender, language, cultural background, and any special needs they may have. These principles include avoiding undue delay. These principles include making the physical environments of proceeding as welcoming as possible. These principles include ensuring children have adequate information and support from a trusted adult. These principles include ensuring their safety from reprisal. And perhaps most importantly, child-sensitive approaches respect the right of children to be heard. We must also ensure that justice systems hold perpetrators of violence against children accountable to end impunity. Ladies and gentlemen, the empowerment and participation of children in all decisions that affect their lives is at the heart of my mandate's work. International law stipulates that children have the right to be heard and their views should be given due weight in accordance with the age and the maturity of the child. However, this commitment is not consistently built into justice systems. For example, at all stages of the criminal justice process, from encountering the police to the implementation of sanctions, including in institution and custodial settings, children's view and experience continue to be poorly heard across the world. Likewise, in civil justice decision-making for children who may be in need of alternative care, determining the necessity of alternative care for that child and their most suitable care option relies on practitioners ensuring the views of the child are sought, heard, and genuinely taken into account. Unfortunately, this is far from yet being the norm. Children accessing justice systems often do not have systematic access to legal advice, representation, and advocacy. Over 1/4 of courts worldwide fail to let children give evidence due to their age or because evidence from children is not given due weight in court proceedings. All forms of justice can better meet the rights of children and be more effective if they are informed by children's view and experiences and build on children's effective participation. To achieve this, we must examine all justice systems, both formal and traditional, to assess how children are informed, empowered, and able to meaningfully participate in line with international commitments. It requires specialized and age-appropriate legal assistance and representation. And this must be available for all children, not just the privileged few. More broadly, every state requires sustainable and high levels of political commitment to implement justice for children at national and local level. This needs to be underpinned by the establishment of a comprehensive and child-centered justice framework, including preventive, restorative, and innovative approach, including equal access to child and gender-sensitive social and justice services and remedies, including strongly tackling structural injustice and corruption, including ending impunity, including empowering communities and children through access to appropriate information, legal aid, and increasing participation within the justice system. Ladies and gentlemen, the work of legal professionals is critical to making this happen. You know better than anyone else that the difficulties with the justice system are and where the opportunities for progress lie. You can become the greatest champions for children in making access to justice a reality for children through your diverse professional roles and through the authoritative advocacy you can undertake on this topic. And more than anything else, you can help change attitudes and behavior within the legal world and society at large. You can promote a switch from approaches that are quick to stigmatize and criminalize children, especially children from marginalized or poor backgrounds, to an approach where their rights are respected and their voice are heard. Ladies and gentlemen, we are having this discussion under the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic. As you know, the pandemic has created a global emergency with multiple dimensions. The public health crisis has triggered a wave of sickness and death in every country. An economic, employment, and financial crisis is hurting billions of people, especially those who are already vulnerable or disadvantaged. We know also that the mitigation measures taken in response to the COVID-19 pandemic have increased the risk of children being exposed to violence both at home and online. We also know that the capacity of child protection, health, social care, and legal services to respond have also been disrupted. And we know also that the huge socioeconomic impact of this pandemic will exacerbate children poverty and vulnerability to many forms of violence, including child marriage, child labor, trafficking, enrollment in armed or violent extremist groups, sexual exploitation. We know also that the economic impact of the budget will increase the burden on justice systems. Children and other marginalized groups and communities already face the greatest risk of injustice. The pandemic makes them more vulnerable. States may become unstable as their health, justice, and other institutions are overwhelmed and their economies collapse. An effective justice response is hampered by the impact of the pandemic. Justice workers are on the front line of the response. Many justice institutions are already struggling to function as a growing number of people are forced to take time off work. But as the UN Secretary General has reminded us, the seriousness of the threats the world faces should not prevent us from seizing this watershed moment for investment in critical public services and global public goods. As we take stock of responses to the pandemic so far and look ahead to building back better afterwards, we have the opportunity to reassess our priorities. We can choose to leave the inequalities and weaknesses in our social fabric as they were before the pandemic, or we can choose to build more peaceful, just, and inclusive societies founded on transparent and accountable institutions. We must start by learning the lessons from the first phase of the pandemic and integrate them into emergency preparedness plans now, including protocols from interagency cooperation and for how the administration of justice can continue to operate under such challenging conditions. We must ensure that child protection services, including justice, are identified as essential and life-saving, along with physical health, mental health, education, and legal services as part of a multi-sectoral and child rights-based response built on a solid and sustainable social protection system. We need a meaningful multi-stakeholder approach with the participation of children at the heart of the immediate and longer-term response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Children's deprivation of liberty must truly be a measure of last resort. Many countries decided to release children who were deprived of liberty during the pandemic for public health reasons. I will argue that this should have been done anyway for child rights reasons. But it raised the question, if states were willing to end the deprivation of liberty for children under these circumstances, why were they deprived of liberty to begin with? And we must also think about the impact on children when their parents or caregivers are deprived of liberty. We must increase innovation and smart working by solving cases online or over the phone instead of in court, and by supporting grassroots and other justice providers to provide their services virtually. We must target hotspots where violence is growing, invest in legal aid and proactive outreach to victims of abuse, and create safe space for children at risk of violence. We must also protect the justice workforce, helping them stay healthy, providing them with counseling and support, strengthening their capacities and skills, as well as the cooperation with the other key actors involved in child protection system. Ladies and gentlemen, building back better cannot be just another mantra. It must have a real positive impact on people's lives. We can choose to build societies that are more equal, more just, and more inclusive. Indeed, we must do so. If we fail to take this opportunity, I fear we will not keep the promise of the 2030 agenda to end violence against children and guarantee justice for all, leaving no one behind. In conclusion, I want to let you know that it has been a pleasure to provide this overview of the issue of justice for children in the context of implementing the SDGs. I look forward very much to our discussion and to hearing and learning from you too. Many thanks.
Muchas gracias, representante especial Nayat Mala Majid. Sin duda alguna, todo lo que nos comenta es de gran relevancia para la protección del acceso a la justicia de niños, niñas y adolescentes. Muchas gracias por todo su trabajo que usted hace día con día para defender a este grupo en situación de vulnerabilidad que muchísimas veces es silenciado ante las grandes injusticias a las que enfrentan, sobre todo cuando tienen más de una situación de vulnerabilidad, como por ejemplo niños en situación de migración, en situación de calle o, como bien ya dijo ahorita, privados de su libertad. Bueno, como les comenté inicialmente, recolectamos las preguntas que nos llegaron del público que nos acompaña el día de hoy. Entonces, representante especial, si no tiene inconveniente, empezaré con la primera de ellas. La primera es, ¿cuáles son las mejores prácticas que se han identificado en el marco de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible para garantizar el acceso de justicia de niñas, niños y adolescentes?
Okay. I think what is important is we must consider this question at different stages of children's interaction with justice system. We can start, for example, with legal identity for children, and it's linked to SDG 16. Many, as I highlighted, don't have one because they were not registered at birth or because they are refugees, displaced, and so on, or belonging to minorities. And this is a serious barrier, you know, to have access to services and being recognized. But we have wonderful examples in many countries that have invested in birth registration, and the rate of birth registration is increasing. We have also good examples in providing documentation, you know, to children who are marginalized, to children who are refugees or internally displaced. This is very important to avoid this stateless. We have also another point that is really important is to ensure that children have access to child-sensitive, you know, reporting and complaint mechanisms. This is very important, and you know it's done in many countries and in Latin America with all these hotlines, with many platforms. You have some hotlines who are really run by civil society. You have in other countries, they are run by social institution and public services. But what is important, the best thing we saw is also when you have this hotline and you have a platform of multi-services, and the children can really request not only the social worker, but they are helped also by a law enforcement agency, by police, by psychologists to have this kind of multi-stakeholder approach. We need also to ensure that, and we have a good example regarding justice proceedings that are really child sensitive. And we have a lot of guidance were already established, regarding how we interview children, how we really interact with children, how we avoid undue delay, how we choose the good way to communicate, taking into account the age of children, his development, and also the context and the profile of children. How we also use, all this child protection proceeding in a kind of a child safe space, allowing children to trust, to feel confident, and to communicate easily. We have also, what is important is the way that the judges are informing, to inform children about all the judicial proceedings, the different steps, to restitute also. And the main important point is also to hear and to take into account their voices, as this is very important, and their concern. And one good example I just highlight is really avoiding deprivation of liberty for some reason and making it as the last resort. This is very important. And the establishment also of alternative to justice, restorative, rehabilitation, recovery, communication, community-based programs that was established in many countries. And you have one good example also is also how, ensuring transparency and governance, and here, and accountability. And in many countries, you have independent monitoring of the whole justice system with reports that are published and widely disseminated. And you have in many countries also grievance redress mechanisms, platform, ombuds that really allow persons who are not happy with the justice to complain and to make their problem, resolved within an independent system. These are some main points, but the list is longer.
Muchísimas gracias, representante especial. Pues mire, la siguiente pregunta está relacionada con algo que usted mencionaba respecto de las juezas, de los jueces, y en el sentido de brindarles un espacio, por ejemplo, para escuchar sus opiniones y su sentir cuando justo los niños y las niñas son parte de un proceso. La pregunta concreta es, además de esta que usted mencionó, ¿cuáles son las áreas de oportunidad que tienen los poderes judiciales de los estados para el cumplimiento de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible?
Could you repeat the question, because I hear only the beginning?
Claro que sí. Claro que sí, representante. ¿Cuáles son las áreas de oportunidad? ¿Cuáles son las cuestiones que podría mejorar los poderes judiciales de los estados para cumplir con los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible?
I think really that the judiciary branch has a big role, not only in responding, but also as a strong tool of promoting and protecting children's rights. They are in a strong place, and I think it's important. They are dealing with children, with families, with communities, with other key stakeholders, and I think they can influence really the implementation of SDGs. But it's not easy. I think it's not about wonderful knowledge of the legislation, but also is also about the practices, the mindset, the behavior. It's also about knowing very well all the other key stakeholders that are working within child protection system, because justice is part of child protection system. I think it's important to take it into account. And another point I think is also the culture of lawfulness, because by using, avoiding punity, but taking time to better understand what is going on, what makes these children being in contact with law. He could be victims, he could be, witness, but he could be also author. But we need to understand, because what we saw also is that all these punitive responses or putting children in institution, in many cases, the impact is very bad. and you have a high rate of recidivism. And I think also is having this kind of reading the legislation, taking into account the jurisprudence. This is very important. And never forget that the best interest of child is the most important consideration to take into account. This is very important. And also to take time, because we can't have expeditive justice, to take time. This is very important, to listen and to be flexible, to have the response that it's adapted to children, its context. It's not easy, because you have to work with social workers, with psychologists, with law enforcement and justice, and so on. And also, I think the power is to accelerate investigation and really to make sure that all the perpetrators are accountable, and to fight impunity and corruption. This is very important, and it's really important. It's a strong signal. We need children, we need communities trusting the justice institution. This is very important. If we need to see the reporting, increasing, because this is very important. And I think the justice has a wonderful role in changing minds, in also, building this culture of lawfulness. This is very, very, very important.
Muchas gracias, representante. Totalmente de acuerdo con lo que menciona. Y bueno, ahora que mencionó a los actores relevantes de la protección de niños, niñas y adolescentes, dentro de su experiencia, ¿cuál es la importancia del trabajo de la sociedad civil en el cumplimiento de estos objetivos de desarrollo?
I think that civil society are a key partner. And when I am speaking about civil society, I'm not only speaking about the national NGOs, but also the local NGOs and the faith-based organization and the community-based organization. We need to take into account. And also, we saw more and more a child-led and youth-led organization. And I think it's important to build on all this. We saw since the beginning that civil society could provide services, could provide counseling, are involved in prevention, are working closely with justice, providing, free legal assistance to children, psychological expertise. And I think this is important. And we saw in many countries, really, when judge and all the justice system is working closely with civil society is very important. For example, providing alternative to institutionalization. This is very important because civil society can play this role. Civil society are very strong also in advocacy, in also monitoring the implementation of law, because the judge are implementing a legislation, and in some cases the legislation is not very compliant with the international standard. And I think also when we saw the civil society, all the forms of providing services, preventive measures, and I think really it's a key partner for the justice system. Really, I am not, forgetting the other, but it's a really key partner for assessing situation in some countries when you have no social workers. It's the social workers of civil society who are assessing the situation of children, are assessing, also the environment where children is going to live, are providing the follow-up. This is important about, and also visiting children and working with children in institution, children in detention. And just I remind you, regarding SDGs, the SDG 17 is about partnership. And here it's important, and civil society organization is a key and strong partner to really work with. And I think working closely with justice, I have an experience. I was working in my country, Morocco, really with judge, law enforcement agencies, and we made change. Really, we made change. We built together alternative to institutionalization. We built together alternative to detention. And I think it's possible. Over.
De acuerdo, representante. Sin duda alguna, la sociedad civil siempre tiene algo que decir, siempre es la defensora de aquellos que no tienen voz para defenderse por ellos mismos. Entonces, sin duda alguna, coincido con usted, la sociedad civil siempre va a ser una aliada justamente en este tipo de metas específicas que tenemos al respecto. Representante, la siguiente pregunta es, ¿Cuáles son los mecanismos de participación de niños, niñas y adolescentes dentro del cumplimiento de los objetivos del desarrollo sostenible?
Participation, child participation is one right, and it's, I was hearing my translation. Okay. Child participation is one right. And also it's one guiding principle of the CRC. We have to never forget. What means it's participation is not only, asking a child and forgetting him, is really ensuring an ethical and inclusive and meaningful participation. And it's really important regarding, participation in the Sustainable Development Goal. I can tell you that I met wonderful groups of children and wonderful initiatives undertaken by children to raise awareness about the implementation of SDGs, to mobilize, to do initiative, really to make sure that they are implemented, to advocate very strongly. Many children were involved in the process of designing the voluntary national report. And currently, I think what we were doing, and we saw it during the COVID-19, when you involve children, they are not only speaking about their concerns, but they are giving their views, but also they are giving solutions. And we need to listen to them because their solutions are more pragmatic, are more realistic, and they are feasible. And we need to see them not only as recipients, but also as agents of change, of positive change. And when you make them part of the solution, you are sure that the solution will be sustainable and appropriate. This is very important because child participation in implementing SDGs has to be systematized. And you see worldwide currently, many children are protesting on streets, but also protesting, within social media. They are not waiting for the adults to support them. They have their own ideas. And it is why it's important to not have them in a parallel way, but really to embark them in building the solution. This is really very important. And even within the judicial proceedings, this is very important. If we want to have a peaceful, just, inclusive society, you need to make sure that children are informed, empowered, listened, and involved in the implementation and in the solution and in the implementation. Over.
Totalmente de acuerdo, representante. Muchas gracias por esta amplia respuesta a la pregunta. Esta pregunta quizá pueda llegar a abordar cosas que usted ya dijo sobre la marcha. Si usted quisiera decir algo más, se lo agradeceremos. La pregunta es, ¿cuáles son los retos en materia de violencia que tiene la comunidad internacional para cambiar la realidad de niños, niñas y adolescentes?
I think that first, before the pandemic, we were facing, despite some key achievements regarding legislation, regarding, some programs, regarding preventive, regarding data, but we were seeing that we were not on track to achieve the SDG 2030 and mainly 16.2. And currently, with the pandemic, that shows worldwide that violence has increased due to confinement, due to measures, to restriction, to domestic violence, violence online. But we are seeing also the big risk of increasing more and more violence with the pandemic and mainly the socio-economic impact of pandemic. And the main challenges since we start regarding preventing and ending violence against children is to have this multi-stakeholder approach. What does it mean? It's very easy to put it in a paper, but very difficult to implement it because it means building a chain of services where justice, law enforcement agency, healthcare, teachers, social, services, and child protection services and social protection systems has to be, delivered at the same place. And this, we have a big problem. We have also many good programs that are in capitals or in some places that are not scaled up. And we have the big problem of sustainability of all these programs, because many are depending on donors, because we are seeing protection of children against all forms of violence, exclusion, or discrimination as a kind of part of social that it's parallel. It has to be embedded in all the national plan of development, because child protection is an investment. Social protection is an investment. And when I'm speaking about child protection, I am including justice. It's not only about social services. I am including health and mental health. I am including education. I am including participation. This is very important, and this is our challenge. And the main risk now, because of the impact on the budget of this, the impact of this pandemic, we could lose the achievement, and the risk is not to invest on social, services, including child protection. And this is a main risk, and we need really to fight and to make sure that it's seen as an investment. If not, it will be we are going to lose the battle, and we are not going to keep the promise we made to children in 2015. Over.
Muchas gracias, representante. Totalmente de acuerdo. Le agradezco mucho por su respuesta. Hay una pregunta muy específica sobre conflictos armados. ¿Qué se está haciendo desde los Objetivos de Desarrollo para evitar que niños, niñas y adolescentes participen activamente en conflictos armados en contra de su voluntad?
You know that there is another UN Special Representative on Children in Armed Conflicts. We are on the same floor, and we are working together very closely, because you know that children in armed conflicts are facing many other forms of violence. And what UN did, they provide many, and not only me, as UN system, because you have the UN SRSG on in CAC, you have UNODC, you have UNICEF, you have my mandate. We are a lot, the Global Compact on Counterterrorism. To make it short, first, many guidance and many capacity building to those who are dealing with children. Another point is really the prevention of, making children enrolled in armed conflict or in violent extremist group or in armed gangs. This is important, because how you prevent it? You prevent it by many things. First, to make sure that children are living in a kind of justice and equality. And when I'm speaking about justice, it's more about social justice, equal opportunities, equal chances. This is very important, to make sure that children are living in a protective and empowering and nurturing and safe environment. This is another main issue. In the same time, currently, regarding the prevention of enrollment in armed gangs and also in violent extremist group, we are working very, very closely and together, not only with at global level, but also at regional and local level, with state members, regional organization, and many key actors here in UN, to really work on a sustainable prevention of enrollment, because you have to act at many fronts at the same time, making sure that children are living in good condition, but you need also to make sure that you are, preventing children of being, facing all this hate speech. This is very important. Strengthening the culture of lawfulness. Another important thing is really working on online also currently, and seeing how we can prevent, because children are facing many propaganda and within the social media, and this is very important. Also, we are working together on it. We provide many also tools and sharing experiences among the country regarding also the return of children who were involved in armed conflict, to make sure that they are not going to be to have a kind of recidivism. We are using also and working together with peer-to-peer programs, and you know that you have many children and youth that are peace builders, you have a lot, and the role of UN is to play a role of convening, catalyzing, working closely with state members, with civil society, with children themselves, to make sure really to prevent. And the best way to prevent is really ceasefire. And I remind you that the call of the SG this year during the pandemic is really for ceasefire. And I think it's really important because the conflicts are increasing, and it's a pity. Over.
Muchas gracias, representante. Totalmente de acuerdo. El combate contra los conflictos armados se ha visto principalmente encabezado por el secretario general, por la Asamblea General, por el Consejo de Seguridad. Hasta la Corte Penal Internacional lo prohíbe como un crimen el reclutamiento de niños en conflictos armados, de menores de 16 años en conflictos armados. Y es una lástima que esto siga ocurriendo hoy en día. Totalmente de acuerdo con usted. Al final del día creo que se puede prevenir todo desde un inicio, desde el origen, en el sentido de promover que no existan conflictos armados, que la verdad es uno de los más grandes retos que ha tenido la Organización de las Naciones Unidas pues en los últimos años. Entonces, pues muchas gracias por la iniciativa del secretario general, de usted, muchas gracias por esto, porque es lamentable la situación que viven los niños y las niñas en conflictos armados. Pasando a otro tema totalmente diferente, representante, le hacen una pregunta sobre adopción. ¿Existe una violencia en contra de niños y niñas cuando son adoptados por parejas del mismo sexo? ¿Podría ser considerado esto como una violencia psicológica? ¿Y qué consecuencias les causaría o no en su desarrollo formativo?
I think first, as we are speaking about adoption, I think what is important, independently of the adoptive families, the best interest has to guide and has to be the primary consideration. This is very important. And what is important for me, it's not about the, the nature of the family, same sex or single mother or, many other forms of families. I think what is important is really the environment. If the family, adoptive family, is able to provide a protective, nurturing, caring, loving environment, this is a main important point. I remind you that even families that are regular are many of them, and we saw it worldwide, that you have also abuse in these families. You have dysfunctional families. It's not related only to the sex or to gender. I think we need really to be very careful regarding that. And to date, and I am pediatrician, there is no scientific evidence that shows that these children are really impacted or are more impacted psychologically or are more at risk of violence. And we have, for me, what is important, independently of the nature of the family, what is important is to have strong international and national laws regarding adoption that make sure that the children are really, adopted by a family that meets the criteria. And it's very, very explicit in the Hague Convention, in CRC. And at the same time, what is important, and it's also clearly explicit in the Hague Convention, is to have also a follow-up of these children. This is very important, a kind of monitoring. This is one. The other point that it's important is really to be very strict before the adoption, because I remind you that you have in many countries also that the adoption is not regulated, and we saw it, and you have children who are adopted by sexual predator, and they are not, it's only one, I am not speaking about same-sex family, and we have to be very careful regarding the amalgam. For me, what is important is make sure that the children are living in protective and nurturing environment, and that we have due diligence, we have assessment, and you have also in place child-sensitive complaint mechanism, and children who are really being at risk or being victim can reach them. Over.
Muchas gracias, representante. Totalmente de acuerdo. La base justamente para que se pueda judicializar, para que se pueda abrir la puerta a este tipo de relaciones, totalmente recaen en una base legislativa sólida. También aprovecho, o sea, para comentarle, representante, que también en el caso mexicano, el Poder Judicial ha tenido un papel preponderante en esto. Fue gracias justamente a los casos que fueron llegando a la Suprema Corte, en donde justamente se establecieron estos criterios que afortunadamente ya van siendo mayoría en todo el país, en los que se establece que no existe un único modelo de familia y que no debemos delimitarnos a la concepción básica de matrimonio hombre-mujer, sino tenemos que olvidarnos de eso y pensar justamente justo en materia de adopción en la calidad de personas, en las personas, no en su sexo, ni en su orientación sexual, ni en su género, ni en su identidad de género incluso. Entonces, muy atinado, y digo, totalmente, le agradecemos todo su comentario, es totalmente pertinente. Y bueno, en ese sentido también es verdad que en México sí se ha estado haciendo un esfuerzo justo a través de los poderes judiciales, del Poder Judicial Federal particularmente, para tratar de impulsar justamente los cambios legislativos en las constituciones locales de los estados federales que conforman la República Mexicana. Representante especial, tenemos dos últimas preguntas, si me permite. Una de ellas, ya usted habló sobre eso, solo se la pongo a su consideración por si usted desea agregar algo adicional. La pregunta es, ¿cuál fue el impacto que sufrió el avance de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible en el tema de niños, niñas y adolescentes a raíz justamente de la pandemia por COVID-19?
I will respond quickly, but I want to react to and to congratulate Mexico for this regarding the adoption. And, because I think society is evolving and we need also legislation to be adequate. But what is important is to put norms, standards, safeguards, and to implement and to control and to assess. This is very important. And I come back to my question. I already did, but I think just very shortly. First, this pandemic and the mitigation measures that have disrupted, many things regarding mainly social protection and justice and access to justice, the problem of isolation, the problem of school closure that make children more connected when they have the chance to be connected, but also it has increased the digital divide because the poor families and children who are living in remote areas or poor or in many places where they have no access to free, internet and to free devices. They are not currently in school or having access to education, and it's a big risk of dropouts. This is to have to take into account. The other point is the increasing of violence online, and Europol launched past March report showing the increase of child sexual offenders online. This is amazing. We see an increasing also of cyberbullying, and we see an increasing of domestic violence, children victims, but also children witnessing violence, because there is a link between violence against women and violence against children, and you see around the world the importance of increasing violence. Another point we saw also in some countries, due to the confinement measure, arrest of children who were living or working on street, children who are not respecting, and we saw that also. And another point is regarding the vulnerability of children who were, in already vulnerable situation, because they are on street, because they are in a humanitarian setting, because they are in armed conflicts, because they are enrolled, they have no access. And you know better than me that the humanitarian support was not accessible to them. And we really, and I heard just today that in one country, I don't remember, that children who were in institution, who were in detention, were isolated to avoid the risk of, and the main impact of this is regarding children's mental health. And our report on COVID under 19, initiative COVID under 19, highlight children how they feel anxious, how they feel lonely, how they feel they have many fear, and their main important concerns were safety and education, just to let you know. And this is important. We are going to launch it on 17 November. I can share with you also the results. It will be important. But the most important impact that we need to take into account is the huge socio-economic impact. You know, World Bank estimates that 100 million will fall in extreme poverty by end of 2020, in 2 months, and mainly children and women. And the ILO, you know, estimate an increase also of child labor and child trafficking. And UNFPA estimates that child marriage is going to increase. And just we had a meeting, and currently it's also an increase. We are seeing an increase of enrollment of children in armed gang, in criminal network, and in violent extremist group. This is a big risk. It is why I was insisting in my presentation, we need to take into account these risks and to start working on it, to work it in another innovative way, to make sure that we are not going to lose the key achievements, but to see the pandemic and the post-pandemic really as an opportunity to reassess the priority and to see that investment in child protection and in social protection, and when we are speaking about child protection, is include education, health, mental health, and justice. This is has to be seen as an investment in the economic recovery package. Over.
Muchas gracias, representante. La última pregunta, si no tiene inconveniente, es en relación un poco con los jueces, con el rol de los jueces, de los órganos de administración de justicia, y está relacionada con su opinión sobre la relación justamente entre el trabajo de los sistemas de salud a través de políticas públicas o asistencia sanitaria y justamente los sistemas de justicia.
I think that the judge are really a key point or key mechanism in, in child protection system. They have not to see them outside. And I think we know that currently judges are waiting for the expertise of the healthcare, are waiting for the social expertise of social workers, are waiting for the investigation of the law enforcement agencies, are looking for alternative response, looking for care institution, looking, where they can, if they want to provide, response to protect children, what could be, they are obliged to work with the other. And I think it's important. But in the same time, it's important, I think, when we are speaking about child protection system at local level, I'm not speaking about, these wonderful papers and big policies that stay in one office at the national level. I'm speaking really about practical things. And I think judges are really a big tool in, promoting and being, having these capacities of knowing who are the other stakeholders, having this kind of team spirit, working with the others, having this leadership to mobilize the other, centered, and child rights centered. Another point that is very important, the judge can make a life change of children, and this is important. And by his taking decision, that has to be guided by the best interest of children. And what means the best interest of children is not easy. And I think it's important that judges not only implement the law, but also has to be flexible with a good understanding of the best interest, taking into account the age of children, the profile of children, the context, socio-economic and cultural context of children, seeing, what could be the best alternative, playing the role of mediation when it's needed, playing the role of guidance when it's needed, linking, children and communities and families with other key stakeholders. I think, very frankly, judges are a key because they are the actors of implementation and interpretation of laws. And I think it's important. I can give you an example, just a practical example. In my country, in Morocco, I was working with judges. I am not against them, because for me, it's very important to have the same vision. And what is important, for example, violence, the meaning of violence was not clear, because for them, the psychological violence, I am speaking about my country, or child labor, was not a kind of violence, because they're telling me it's a kind of social charity. And when we explain that these are the impacts of child labor, because the psychological aspect of violence is not seen, but it is here and it is impacting. When you start working and sharing between social workers, health sector, teachers, and you share this common vision, and you start understanding, that this is a kind of violence, even it's not visible. And I think it's important. And this could be the good response, because if I am going to put these children in institutional care to protect him and I forget him, it's not good. And also a judge have a big role in also following their decision. For example, when they place or they put children in detention or they place in an alternative care, they have also the duty to follow, to see how it's going on, because it's not only about paper, it's about children, it's about life. And I trust judge, because I met wonderful judge that really become a strong child rights activist involving, moving, and you can with the other mobilize to make sure that we can. And it's not about only money or economy, it's also about a strong commitment, behavior, and also attitude and ethics. Over.
Totalmente de acuerdo, representante, totalmente de acuerdo. Muchísimas gracias por sus palabras. Representante, no tiene idea de la cantidad de preguntas que tenemos que han sido enviadas incluso durante la conferencia, pero si las leemos todas, necesitaríamos fácilmente 3 horas más de su tiempo. Entonces, pues bueno, me da muchísima pena no haberlas leído todas, pero créame que también ha recibido una cantidad de felicitaciones enorme por esta conferencia de tan alto nivel que tuvimos con usted el día de hoy. Yo en lo personal le agradezco su labor que realiza como la representante especial del secretario general en esta materia, y sin lugar a dudas es usted un gran referente y un gran ejemplo para todas las mujeres, para todas las personas que desde nuestras trincheras nos dedicamos a la defensa de los derechos humanos. Muchas gracias, representante. No sé si quiera agregar algo más o con esto daríamos por concluido, como usted me diga.
No, I just want to tell muchísimas gracias a todas y todos. I really trust and I am passionate. And I think judge is not only a profession, it's also a vocation. And I think we need, and we can make change. I truly believe that we can do it. And it is why, really, very frankly, if you have a lot of questions, you can send it to me and I can respond also. But I think it's better when I am speaking with my hands and so on. And but I trust, really, I trust we can make it. We can make it. And I hope, because I am not going to be here on 2030, but I hope that at least we are going to start this way, and we can do it. And really, regarding also this region, you are doing a lot. And I think just to push more and to aggregate all that, I think it's really important. And it was a pleasure.
El placer fue definitivamente nuestro, representante especial. Le agradezco mucho por haber estado y por habernos acompañado aquí el día de hoy. En este caso, pues bueno, damos por concluido el evento. A todas las personas que nos han acompañado por las redes sociales, les agradecemos mucho su asistencia el día de hoy. Les quiero decir que en días posteriores se va a subir este video de esta conferencia al micrositio de la Dirección General de Derechos Humanos en español, por si quieren verlo en este idioma. Y bueno, no me queda más que darles las gracias a